Alright, in this section we will do the hands-on part. So we'll look into the four pillars that we discussed before, which are the pillars that are representing or showing the expectations of modern network, and we will demonstrate how we can build this up from a Meraki platform and how we can integrate with other systems to deliver the best outcome. So starting first with controlled access and threats, what we will do, we will actually create a different systems or mechanisms to authenticate users, and we will utilize system manager to be able to identify corporate devices and control them. And also we will have bring your own device kind of policy for non-corporate devices, while using Active Directory or Windows 80/MPS or Radius to control the access. And for guests, we're gonna utilize Meraki platform to allow users to accept some terms and conditions via splash page before granting access to the network. So the setup is pretty simple. We do have a station or branch that we will create, which consists of MX, MS, and MR. Of course, we will create a bunch of VLAN to separate and isolate the traffic. We will get the lab station or the branch connected to the data center, so we will do side-to-side VPN, and we advertise the traffic, and we will advertise the subnets from the data center to the branch and the other way around. The data center will have the Active Directory or the Radius server, and on the right side there you will see there is some domain that doesn't have Meraki. That could be a legacy network using MPLS, or it can be like a third-party network that integrated to the network that we do have. So we will show how we can leak the routes to this BGP domain and advertise the routes from this BGP domain to the branches. So without wasting more time, let's go to the dashboard and build this up. So the first thing that we will do there is I will create a new network. So the first network I will create there is our system manager network. And with the system manager, what we will do there, we will utilize system manager to basically identify corporate owned devices, and we will set one SSID that will identify or inspect first system manager. So if the device doesn't have system manager, they will get no access to the network. And we will do some settings there. So I won't actually go and build the settings now, but potentially later on I will show how we can have maybe critical application pushed to those devices when they enroll themselves into system manager. And also we will play with the settings and have like security policy and show how we can integrate system manager to the rest of the platform. So for the time being, I'm just gonna have this network there, but we will configure it in more details later. The second step here, I will create a network for my branch. So let's assume this is branch 1, and in this branch I'm just going to select the hardware that I'm actually utilizing for this setup, and once we hit create here, it will just get all those hardware into this network so we can actually start to configure them. I guess one of the things that we always see, and it's more of a best practice as well, is to create a template. So what we want to do here is, instead of going to each individual network that we create for our branches, I want to have one template that I can use for all my branches. So whenever I want to change my security policy, there's no need to go to a 10 or 100 or 1,000 of networks to do that. I'll just use my template that all the networks are binded to, and potentially whenever I need to change something, it'll be just only touching one place. So let's build this one up. So I will just go here to my configuration templates and potentially create a new template. So I'll just name this template to be my branch template. And then it will ask me if I want to bind any network to it. So I'll just say yes, branch 1, and I hit save. So what will happen now is my branch 1 network will actually get attached to my template. So any configuration I want to do, I should go here to my branch template that I just created, and I just basically change it there. So let's go and configure now the network based on the diagram that we had. So I'm just going to put side by side my diagram that we just created. Let me just put this one here side by side. So one of the things I will notice once we create a template, that we don't have a monitor column in the list there, so only configure column shows up. And the reason being, of course, because this is just a domain to configure your networks from. There's no reports to be actually shown from the template. You go to individual networks and show the reports from there. So the first thing that we will do is create the VLANs that we have on the diagram there. So I'm just going to actually disable the default setting, which has one or single VLAN. I will just create multiple VLANs. So starting first with management, my management VLAN should be unique, and I'm just going to use 10.155.155.0/24. And also I'm just gonna break this super subnet into small subnets like /28s for my sites. And I would just have this VLAN to be 155. By default, it's VLAN 1, so it's not best practice to keep the management VLAN to be VLAN 1. I will create another VLAN for my voice traffic. So this is VLAN 110, and has to be unique because I'm going to share this VLAN in or share it across my sites. So it has to be unique. And I'll make it /24s out of the /22. And then I'll create another VLAN for my corporate traffic. Again, has to be unique. VLAN will be 10. So some people will stop there. I actually going to create another VLAN for my limited access. So potentially what I want to do here is, if you're not using corporate device, which means you don't have system manager on your endpoint, I still want to give you access to the network, but it'll be limited access. So I'll block certain applications from being accessed because maybe your device could be compromised, so I don't want to risk the network. So I'm just creating this limited VLAN. And then the last VLAN I will have there is guest. And with the guest VLAN, I'm going to actually have it to be the same across all my organization, because I don't really want to advertise this VLAN across. This is just going to be mainly local and allow access to the internet directly. So I'm configuring here the gateway, and I will give it VLAN ID to be 101. So that's pretty much it. I don't want to create any other VLANs. Now, next step here would be going and create group policies and attach these group policies to the VLAN we just created. So as I mentioned before, for my limited VLAN or for non-corporate devices, I want maybe to block the critical application that we use for our business. So I'll just name this one here to be limited. And what I want to do is I can customize the firewall rules here. So the rule that I want to apply as an example, I want to block Office 365, assuming that we use it for emails and other applications. And potentially, if you're not using a corporate device, then unfortunately, I won't give you access to your email. And maybe I'll apply another group policy for my guests. And with my guests, it's easy actually that I only want to allow them to access the internet. So I'm just going to block any private subnet from being accessed. So all the super subnets for private traffic will be dropped. Of course, we're going to set up from the access point as well to do the same thing. So whether you want to do it on the access point end or on the group policy and the MX end, it doesn't really matter. And of course, you can tweak other settings like throughput or maybe blocking layer 7 rule applications. We can do whatever we want. So now if I go back to my VLANs that I just created, I can actually go here and attach to my limited VLAN, the limited group policy I just configured. And for my guest, I will also apply my guest group policy. Well, that's perfect. So after we created now the VLANs and applied group policies, we will see how we can use the Radius server to allocate my users to the right VLAN. But once they get the right VLAN, these group policies will be applied to them. I guess the other questions that we normally get here would be, what about my corporate or voice VLAN or even management VLAN? What kind of policy will be applied to them? The answer here would be the policy that we're going to have here in the global configuration. So if I go to the firewall of the MX or of the dashboard, I basically can go and set up some rules. So potentially those VLANs will get the rules that we have here in our global policy. All right, we're not going to configure anything there, but you get the idea. The next thing that we want to do now is to allow the communication between the data center or the connectivity. So we will build side-to-side VPN. So I need to configure my branch to be my spoke, and then I will assign our data center MX to be my hub, and I have to advertise the VLANs here. So I'm just selecting all the VLANs except guest. And as you can see, the dashboard is smart enough not to allow you to actually advertise the guest VLAN, because when we configured it, it was mainly the same because we wanted this VLAN to be just only local. So after configuring side-to-side VPN, now we should be able to talk to the Radius server that we do have in the data center and the other applications there. So we will test this later when we start to configure AD. But let's go to the switch now and start to configure our ports and see how we can make a template out of the switch. So we go here to profiles and we will create a new profile. I will name this one to be MS220, maybe template, and I have this attached to the 228 port model. If I go to this template now, I combine switches. So you see that switch that we just attached to branch 1 falls under the category of this specific template because it's 228 port. So I just go here and bind it to the profile. So now whatever I'm going to configure in the template will get pushed to this switch. So if now I go to my switch ports, and I can actually go and have set up there for the function of each port. So the first one, I will use it for uplink, and I'll just name it uplink and give it a tag that can help me when I do some search. I can go and search with tags. So it will help me to find the right switch straight away. My native VLAN here should be 155. You remember that we changed the management VLAN to from 1 to 155. So I'm just going to have the native VLAN there to be 155. And I'll just hit update and save this configuration. The second port, I'm just going to use it for my access points. And I will leave it as trunk, and I will have 155, which is my management VLAN, to be the native VLAN. I'm actually not expecting this port to be connected to any switch, so I'm just going to configure BPDU guard. So that means if someone trying to unplug the access point and put a switch in, that port will automatically shut down. And then the rest, I'll just configure them as an access, and I'll be able to configure my data and voice VLANs. So let's go quickly here, configure this one to be, those ports to be access. I will give the data VLAN to be VLAN 10, voice VLAN is 110. Again, I'm not expecting any switches to be connected there, so I'll configure the BPDU guard, and then I just hit update and save. So now I got my switch port template fixed and ready to go. The last thing that I want to do now at the switch level, before of course configuring the security part, I just want to go here and change the management VLAN of the switch from 1 to be 155. So that actually will allow me or allow the switch to get the right IP from the management VLAN, and then potentially um, use the right IP schema there. Okay, so that's actually good and straightforward. We haven't done any of the security or authentication yet. We're going to do it after configuring our access points. So let's go here and have our AP template created. So I'm just going to the SSIDs, and what we need to do there is create 3 SSIDs. So the first one will be for my corporate, so I will just name this one XYZ. And the second one here, I will just have it for bring your own device policy, so XYZBYOD. And then the last one will be for my guest, so I'll just call here, this is XYZ guest. And I save. All right, that's awesome. Next step is to configure how I want users to be authenticated. So let's start with the guest because this is the easiest option. So the first thing that we will do for the guest, I'm just going to have a splash page to welcome them. I'm not going to do any pre-shared key or anything, but you still have an option to do that. Like I can actually create a pre-shared key and then show them a splash page. Let's say we're going to only have a splash page to welcome them, and I'm going to block everything before they access or before they clear up the splash page. And then I'm actually going to configure it as a bridge, so it will get the IP from the upstream device. So in our case here, it will go through the switch, and then the switch will go to the MX. I want to use VLAN tagging, so I want to make sure all the users inside this SSID to be part of my guest VLAN, which is 101. And then I'm just going to do band steering, so making sure users will use 5G if their device is capable of 5G. And I actually will make the bit rate to be around 18. Again, just making sure that I give the best performance to my users. Hit save. And then I can go here to the splash page option or menu, and then I can start to configure my splash page. So at the moment, we do have this basic splash page, which if I hit preview, it'll be very simple, welcoming you, and then a button to access the network. So what I want to do here is maybe I will say welcome to XYZ guest Wi-Fi. Here is our T's and C's. And then potentially I can redirect them to our website. So I can go here and say you will get to Meraki website once you clear the splash page. Of course, I can edit the HTML code of the splash page. I wouldn't go into details, but it's actually well documented that you can go through on our website if you want to actually go and edit the HTML, maybe to capture some details of the users that are trying to connect. All right, going back to my other SSIDs and let's configure them. So I'll start here with the BYOD SSID. So I'm actually going to use my Radius server to authenticate the users here. So we'll see an option here to configure the Radius server, which is we're using this IP4. Normally default is using 12, sorry. The pre-share key or the password that we're going to use with the Radius server, we will configure it. It has to be configured or match on both ends. So I will configure the Radius server in a second, but I'm just going to put the password here to finish the Meraki dashboard part, but we will use the same password when we do the configuration of the Radius server. The next thing, we will actually use bridge mode, so we'll get the IP address from my MX. Because this is my limited SSID, I want to make sure all the users will go through my limited policy, which is attached to my VLAN 20. So I'm actually going to tag all the users here to use VLAN 20. And steering again, maybe those devices could be a little bit older, so I'm just actually going to put the bitrate around 12. That's pretty much it for my BYOD SSID, and now I'm going to configure my corporate. SSID. So again, I'm going to use Radius to authenticate them. Same IP address of my Radius server. And then what I want to do here is something a little bit different. So I want actually to make my Radius server decide which VLAN this user should get. So once I put my username and password, I want the Radius server to go and actually assign specific VLAN for those users. So I can actually use my groups within Active Directory or the Radius server that we do have, and let the Radius server through the attributes to send a message to the access point and actually advertising or advising the access point with which VLAN should be used. So what I need to do here is, as you can see, we have an option for Radius override, which means I can allow the Radius server to dictate which VLAN I should use for this user. And then again, I'm just going to do the same settings band steering for this SSID. So now we configured our 3 SSIDs, 2 using Radius to authenticate, and 1 using our splash page. In fact, what we want to do in the corporate SSID here to allow the users to first enroll their devices to System Manager in case they don't have System Manager. And as you can see here, we have an option called System Manager Center Enrollment, which will first test out if the user have System Manager profile on their device, whether it's laptop or iPad or PC, whatever it might be, and then decide either to allow them to access the network or not. So you can see here I do have enrollment network. So I have System Manager network that we just created. I can actually specify which operating systems to be used. I can be focus, restrict, whatever I want to be. And then here I'm just actually going to block all access till you clear the System Manager challenge first, and I hit save. All right, next thing that we want to do now is to configure our Radius server. So I do have a Windows machine, as I mentioned before, and it's a new machine, so nothing really configured there. So let's go and configure it from scratch. So the first thing I want to do is create maybe a couple of users and a couple of groups. So I'll go here to create a new user. I'll just name this one to be user 1. Username should be user 1. And password cannot be changed and never expires. Create another user really quick. So what I want to do is to show you how I can use the Radius server to allocate a VLAN for my users. So if I have 2 users, I can put them in 2 different groups and allow the Radius server to attach them to different VLANs. All right, so I created 2 users. Let's go now and create 2 groups. I'll just name this one maybe my VLAN 10 group, and I'll have another group for VLAN 20. So what I can do next is to attach my user to the group. All right, so I attach the first user to group 10, and I will attach the second user to group 20. So that's the first step. We have the 2 users attached to 2 different groups. Now let's go and configure our MPS service. So the first thing that we need to do there is to create client. So I want to make sure all my Meraki devices will be treated as clients here. So kind of letting the Radius server expect messages from those specific IPs or subnets. So I'm just going to go here and say this is Meraki, maybe Meraki devices. I'm going to allow the whole management VLAN. So the whole /24 that we do have there. If you remember the pre-share key that we put on the dashboard, we need to match it here. So it has to be the exact same key that we used there. So that's step number 1. Step number 2, that we have to create a policy which is .1x policy for the Meraki devices or for the users through the Meraki devices to communicate and start to get challenged against the MPS. So the first thing that we'll do there, I'll just do one for VLAN 10 using Meraki devices, and I'll use PEEP, and then I'll attach my group VLAN 10 that we just actually configured to authenticate against this rule. Now let's configure the attributes. So I want to make sure when the user get authenticated against this VLAN 10 or this rule, we will assign VLAN 10 to them. So my attributes here will be configuring those three parameters, and here I will just specify the VLAN that I want this user to be attached to. So this is for group policy for users number, for VLAN number 10. Now let's do the same thing quickly for VLAN 20. And here we'll put just VLAN 20, which is the parameter that the radio server will send to the access point. So that's all what we need to configure from the radio server end. We can quickly now go to our SSID here, and let's go here and say, let's test user 1 credentials. So you can see here it's passed, and also the attribute that we are receiving from the radio server saying here the VLAN ID is 10. So if I go actually and put my user 2, it will go through the same thing, but the ID here is VLAN 20. So if I actually have an iPad, I'm going to actually show that to you in a second, I'll be able to demonstrate how the user can authenticate and the process, and see when we put user 1 or user 2 which VLAN that we will get assigned to us. Before going into the details of having an iPad and showing how that process will look like and how System Manager can be enforced before granting access to the network, I want to actually go to my System Manager network and configure simple stuff. So I want to make sure that give you a little bit of information around what System Manager can offer. So let's first say whenever I get System Manager pushed to a device, I want to also include specific application to be installed for that device. Let's say like YouTube. And I want actually this from iTunes in Australia. So here I can actually use VPP if you do have this option with Apple, which potentially going to push those applications silently to the devices. In my case, I'm not having VPP account or DEP account, so as an end user, I will just need to accept the application that I'm trying to push. The other thing I want to do as well, maybe I will lock certain feature on the device. So once you get your device enrolled, I'm just going to have this basic policy applied to you. And in this basic policy, let me put this on full screen. I'm going to apply some restrictions there, like disabling the camera. Maybe I'll disable screenshot or screen capture. And as you can see, there's so many other features that you can control. But just to demonstrate how we can actually control the endpoints once they get System Manager profile pushed to them, how that will look like and get a feeling of it. Okay, so I now configured my System Manager. Everything should be ready now when I get my device connected up. So let's get my iPad actually online and demonstrate how we can control the access to the network. So the first thing I want to show is what would be the user experience or the guest experience when they try to connect to the network. So Here I should actually see all the SSIDs that we just configured. So you can see here I have XYZ for my guest. What will happen after get this SSID connected? I should see splash page, which the splash page that we created actually with some T's and C's. And when I hit connect to the internet, what should happen there is to redirect me for Meraki website first, and then I will get full access to the internet. So you can see here, here's the Meraki website. It's loaded. Everything looks cool. Now I do have full access to the internet. So that's for my guest experience. Let's go and check what would be the experience for my corporate. So yeah, if I actually go to XYZ here, the first challenge is put your username and password. So this is using Radius. So I'm just putting my credentials here. This is the Radius certificate. Now I'm actually accepting it. Now, because this device is quite new, I don't have System Manager on it yet. So you see straight away, it tells me your device is not System Manager enrolled. You have two options, either to hit cancel and no access to the network, or you actually continue to register and get your System Manager on the device first. So this is how we can enforce for corporate devices to use System Manager. And then, as I mentioned, we can start to do other features or other settings on the System Manager after getting the device enrolled. So let's get this device enrolled quick. So we need to use Safari to enroll the device because we cannot access website using the splash page. So let's go quickly again to the corporate and open up Safari page. Go to any website. I'll just try to go maybe to example.com. It now gets me again the MDM part. So what will happen now is it will actually go and download a profile. As you see here, it said the profile is downloaded. Let's go quickly to the settings and see this profile. So you see here, there's a profile is downloaded, tells me this is Meraki management, go and install it. Of course, you can do this process before giving away the endpoint to the user. Or if you use something like DEP, you can actually automatically enroll Apple devices into the dashboard, so you don't need to go through this process. But I'm just giving you like worst case experience here. If you don't actually want to do that giveaway, normally people will give away all their hardware to the users and then let the user go through a couple of steps before getting access to the network. So now, as you can see, I got now my System Manager profile pushed. Here it tells me registration complete. If I hit continue, it will just go to the website I was trying to access before, which is example.com. And then now I'm enrolled to System Manager. So if we wait for like a couple of minutes, we will see that we do have now a request to install application, which is YouTube. Again, as I mentioned, if you're actually using VPP from Apple, you will actually get this application pushed silently, so you don't actually need to have a user to say yes or no. I'm not sure if you've noticed or not, but you can see now we don't have any camera application here. So we disabled the camera from being used on these devices. So once we got the devices enrolled, now I don't have a camera in my device. And also, if you actually going to trust me, if I try to take screenshot, it actually doesn't do any screenshotting. So inside my photos, there's no screenshot being taken. I tried, by the way, to take a screenshot multiple times, but it doesn't actually work. So you can see now we do have the two applications that we pushed. This System Manager application really helps the user to understand if they're compliant to my policies or not, and also giving them an indication if they connected to the dashboard or connected to the System Manager dashboard or not. Let's do some more fancy stuff. So what if actually, you can see the device now here is online, so I can actually go to the device in the dashboard and kind of start to look into maybe if my device is compliant to my policies, I can actually go and check, which application I'm installing, the status of my profile, and so on and so forth. It's quite comprehensive in terms of what it can actually offer to you. I wouldn't be able to go into all the features that we do have there. I would recommend you either to do free trial for 30 days or watch one of our webinars online talking more about System Manager and the features that we do have there. One thing I want to do, which is quite unique to us, so the first thing that we've done, and it was unique to us, is basically having the access point to enforce System Manager on the corporate SSID, which what we call System Manager Sentry enrollment. The second thing I want to do here is, what if I'm a naughty boy, downloaded something that I shouldn't download? Maybe I will download Facebook or any application, and me as an owner or a business owner, I'm actually not interested to have any of those applications on my network. So what I can do from System Manager is to create a policy. I would say here, this policy, I will just name it no speed test application. And what we'll do here is I will actually configure a specific application. I will just have this application as a blacklist. Let's say the speed test, because it's actually quite a small application, I'm just going to configure that. If I do have speed test on my iPad, I just want to get notified as an admin that this application has been installed and I'm not interested in it. That could be any application. Or as you can see, there's other stuff I also can set up. Maybe if the user doesn't have 15 minutes to get their screen locked, which could be a security risk there, I will also want to investigate that. Let this policy investigate that and tell me if I'm compliant or not. So I'm just going to configure this one just for simplicity's sake. If I do have speed test application on my iPad, that means I'll become violating this policy and I should get notified by that. So you see here from my iPad, there is a new policy there being created, and now I don't have this application, so I'm compliant. It's green and good. But let's assume, or let's actually do it. I will go to my iPad now and I will download this application. So let's go to App Store. And I'm going to download speed test. So it's a small application. I'm just going to download it now. And what I want to do is I want to see the behavior of my, so here we go, this is the application. I want to see the behavior of my security policy and see if I'm actually going to be violating the policy or not. The other good thing, while we're waiting for this to get pushed, the other good thing about Meraki System Manager that you can do geo-based policies, which means if I actually want to apply those settings when the user is actually physically in my office or in my class, then I can actually limit the configuration to be zoned in a specific geographical area. And for example, once you leave the office or leave the school, you can get completely different policy, which could be allowing you to access everything and even your camera and other stuff. So you can do this if you like. And also, you can set up alerts if you want. So when a device leaves the office, you can get notified, or you get like an email saying that device now has left your office. So you can see now the dashboard straight away detected that I downloaded this application. So if I go to my dashboard, you will see the security policy should change now to red. Now, everything now is telling me that this device have an application that I'm not interested in. Normally, MDM vendor will stop there and you can get notified. So what you need to do next is to go to this particular user and tell them, please remove this application, or maybe apply custom group policy to the user. What I can do, actually, I can automate my policies if I want to. So if I go back to my template, And you will see that I do have an option to create a sentry policy, which this sentry policy will basically do is to look into my MDM security profile and will attach a network policy to it. So if I actually see someone violating my security policy that I have on my MDM, maybe I will block them from using my network. Or if you actually have a device that compliant to specific policy, I will apply a network policy to allow them to access everything. So let's do this. Here, I'm actually choosing my system manager network. And what I can do, I can actually specify a specific tag or the dynamic tag that we attach for security. So you can, if you remember, we had a tag called no speed test. So you see from here, it just actually giving me two tags. It's giving me a compliant tag and violating tag. So what I can do here is specify which tag I want to apply for this sentry policy. And I can apply to them a network policy. Maybe I will give them my guest access policy. So that means, if you're actually violating this policy, I'm going to put you in my guest so you wouldn't get any access to anything internal. In fact, I can do actually even more stuff. So let's say I'm very restricted, really not happy with that device violating my policy. Let me go here and factory default that device remotely. So I can actually go here and erase that device completely. So if I actually go back to my iPad, after a second or two, I will get this message that this iPad now is being factory defaulted. As you can see now, the device is going into through factory default mode, and then we will go through getting this device online as usual. So that's the power of System Manager. That's how you can actually utilize System Manager integrated with the other Meraki systems like Access Points or MX. So you can do this kind of policy across all your network, and potentially if someone is violating your security policies, you can start to apply specific policies or specific group policies to them. And as you can see, the control that you can do, if a device gets compromised or gets stolen, I can actually factory default or erase it remotely without having the device with me. The last thing I want to do is basically configure access as well on my switches. So let's go back to the template. And on the switch, I want to also get the users to be authenticated against radius. So let's say this is my .1x policy. It will use radius authentication. Again, the same radius server that we did have before, and use the same password. The good thing about having this policy created there, it will actually authenticate the users, and then you see here that I have an option. If the user failed to authenticate, I can put them in my guest VLAN. So if you remember, my guest VLAN was 101. I can also use System Manager if I want to check if you do have System Manager on your device that you're trying to connect to the switch or not before getting access to the network. So I'm not going to do that, and I'm also going to bypass the authentication for my voice clients. So now I've created this policy. Before testing it, I just need to go back to my Radius server and apply a new policy for my wired devices. So you see here there's a wired. I will name this Meraki switches. Again, using the same devices. P. What I will do here, I'm not going to split VLAN 10 and 20. I will just let them both authenticate against the radius, and I'm not going to actually assign any special VLAN. They'll get the data VLAN. So I can do the same thing and configure the attributes, but you got the idea, so I'm not going to do it again. All right, so now if I actually try to test against my radius server, I should be able to get data VLAN, and as you can see, the switch has passed the authentication challenge. now I need to actually go to my switch ports and configure the access policy to the ports. So I can search with the name access, or actually better to do with tag. So I just go here and put the tag access, select all, edit, and then I would just go and apply the policy there. And I hit update, so that will save the configuration. So what we've done in this section, we configured our branch or lab station, MX, MS, and MR. We've created multiple VLANs, group policies, got actually Radius integrated, and we've done for our corporate used system manager to make sure we um, that our corporate devices can be controlled and monitored remotely. And for BYOD, we just allowed only authentication against Radius, but then we've created some rules to limit access to the network. After that, we kind of covered the part of how we can get also our switches integrated with Radius, so anyone trying to plug in their device into our switch, they will get challenged, same as our access points. Hope you enjoyed this section. In the next section, we're going to talk about SD-WAN and how SD-WAN works.